A warm welcome in the warm Limassol. Thank you very much to all of you for coming, of course, for joining us for these two, I would say, quite intense days. I will do a very brief introduction so that we'll not waste too much time, because personally, I think most of us are quite eager to know each other's work, know about each other's works, and to possibly discuss it a bit more formally, but still quite informally here, and then when we'll have the chance outside of here as well. Let me briefly introduce the project, thanks to which it's possible to organize this particular event, Archiving Care. Before that, let me briefly say a very warm thank you to the Neme Art Center for taking all the effort to organize technically and logistically this event. The project we are part of is called Toolkit of Care. Let me briefly read what it is about. It's an international project led by an interdisciplinary group of creative practitioners, academics, researchers, and arts organizations that specialize in creative technologies and have considerable experience in the production and dissemination of this kind of knowledge across Europe and internationally, who have come together to form a critical network of care. The network collaborates to share their collective expertise and technical knowledge employed in creative ways to develop knowledge and methodologies of care. The main aim is to produce a well-formulated and integrated toolkit of care comprising articles, prototypes, audiovisual documentation, technical manuals, theoretical analysis, and data. It will act as a model of how to successfully share knowledge and expertise across different geographical regions and social groups. So this particular event is, of course, about archiving. What I think we all share here is a quite radical approach to archiving, and archiving more as a methodology rather than a procedure, rather than a format. And this approach, this methodology, I think is declined, I would say, in very different ways in all the different projects. I think it's a very good opportunity for all of us to hear from each other, in order also to elaborate about the importance of archiving, what is its, in my humble opinion, pivotal role, especially now in this overproduction of information. Actually, the starting point of all of it that I would like to mention is a quote that Yannis selected for the introduction on the booklet, which is a quote from Archive Fever, a quite famous book of Jacques Derrida, which is, "Let us not begin at the beginning, nor even at the archive, but rather at the word archive, and with the archive of so familiar a word. Arche, we recall, names at once the commencement and the commandment." Okay, after that I will start my own presentation for 45 minutes, as all the others, we all have 45 minutes, and then 15 minutes for Q&A. My personal contribution is focused on a couple of practices I've been quite familiar with, and I've developed over the last decade or so, but briefly let me quickly introduce myself. I'm Alessandro Ludovico. I'm the editor-in-chief and founder of Neural Magazine, which recently celebrated the 30 years of publishing. This is the last but one issue. There's another one coming up very quickly. It's a magazine about new media art and critical digital cultures. Also, I'm the author of Post-Digital Print, The Mutation of Publishing since 1894, where also archiving was kind of discussed. It's a book that even before it was printed was free to download. You can still download the English and the Italian version from the domain postdigitalprint.org or wherever you can find it. It has been translated in a few different languages, quite unexpectedly for me. There is a new book, relatively new. It was out a bit more than 6 months ago, called Tactical Publishing, Using Census Software and Archives in the 21st Century, which has been published by MIT Press, but it's open access. You can download chapter by chapter of the whole book if you like. Another couple things more about me. I'm Associate Professor at the Winchester School of Art, University of Southampton in UK. And I'm also part of this AMT, Archaeology of Media and Technology Research Group. Yeah, that's basically as short as possible about me. I would like to start about talking about archiving with an anecdote or so about publishing that happened to me with Neural. Well, among all the issues, there is a particularly thing that happened in 1997. We have made plenty of interviews with the magazines. In 1997, we were still in the big wave of the net art phenomenon, which, I mean, I've seen very, very closely. I can even say I've been kind of a part of. 1997, we decided to interview Jody, quite famous, probably one of the most famous groups about net art, but also quite particular group, not really easy to interview, quite reluctant, very radical in their own approach to any possible medium. Okay, long story short, we asked them if they would like to have an interview. They say, yes, send the questions. We formulate the usual 10 questions, we send the questions to them, and what we got as answers were basically screenshots. And we were quite, a little bit, not disappointed, but curious. Actually, looking more closely at each screenshot, there was a kind of answer, because every screenshot was related to the question. It was about one of their works. But it was a quite difficult way to understand for the general public. So we were, in a way, concerned on what to do with this material. And in the end, we thought we just have to publish it as it is, because that's how the artists answered, and we should just document it exactly as it happened. So on the left side, there are the questions, on the right side, in Italian. At that time, we're still publishing it in Italian. There's written answer, and then the screenshot. Well, actually, it's the only visual, let's call it like that, interview that Jody has ever done. And it has been printed on the magazine, and of course, all these magazines are staying. So this is what I called accidental archiving. And I call it like that because that's what magazines do. We are not aware for every issue what we are actually doing in perspective. We can only understand it after quite a while. So only after years we realized the value of that. And that's exactly what happens with magazines. Okay, going beyond that, I would just like to mention that the two projects I'm talking about this morning are also quite extensively discussed in the chapter Libraries and Cultural Grey Areas from the Tactical Publishing book. The first one I would like to mention is the temporary library. Okay, the temporary library was inspired by one specific concept, as the other project I'm talking later, which is to, I mean, both are about libraries more specifically than archives, but both are about the concept of bringing the cultural material where it's needed. So I'm not at all against the library, the opposite possibly. Institutional libraries, I think they are an essential cultural infrastructure that should be expanded rather than threatened like more or less it is now. But I do think that their role is kind of, I define it jokingly as a monumental role. So what I mean is that you have to go to the library in order to experience their services. Again, still essential. But I think that there are many possibilities of expand this idea, moving the material where it's needed. So this concept actually was developed before I started to think about that. This is a picture of the so-called bookmobile. This is from 1930s in US. Was essentially a means of transportation full of books that was bringing the books where there was no library, usually to kids on the countryside. I'm usually joking about this picture because you see the two ladies very happy and the guy which is very grumpy. I guess it's because there's ice on the road and he's probably the one who has to drive. But I mean, they are very happy and I think also beyond the picture, also because they are bringing this unique possibility to the audience. Well, I'm usually researching because I found out that all over the place there were book mobiles or some sort of mobile libraries. And actually yesterday, late night, I finally found a local, an example for Cyprus. And this was a mobile library from 50s, 60s. It's not perfectly dated, in Nicosia, connected to the main library in the capital. So everywhere there were some sorts of mobile libraries, starting from the beginning of the 20th century. Okay, what I'm trying to introduce now is the concept of liminal librarianship, which I think the book mobiles and the mobile libraries are kind of part of. Let me give you another couple of examples and then I'll tell you about the temporary library. One of the examples is another very simple concept, very liminal, really assembling a resource almost from nothing, in this case from trash, which has been applied by garbage collectors in Ankara, in Turkey. What they have started to do at some point has been to collect the books that were trashed and to collect them in their own facility. And as soon as they reached a substantial amount, they have started to open it to the public quite informally. This process has continued, and they've started lots and lots of books. The more they were paying attention to them trashed in the trash bins, the more they were finding somehow. And at some point they have reached the remarkable figure of 25,000 titles, and the municipality of Ankara has given them a bigger space and turning them actually in a public library, which is freely accessible to all the public. Under certain rules and amount of times as well. Again, I found it perfect as this concept of liminal librarianship. The other concept I would like to introduce is expressed by another art movement I've personally been quite connected a very long time ago, which is the mail art movement. The artists that use the postal network to make art, which I found very connected to the internet art movement as well. Within the mail art movement, there are periodical, every couple of years or so, initiatives, worldwide initiatives, which are all happen locally. And one of them in 2016 was called Move Your Archives. Basically, what artists and collectors of mail art were asked was to move their own archive of mail art, which every artist somehow has, because They are all collecting what is shipped from one to the other to some public place, which could have been even the bench in the small park downstairs for a certain amount of time, making it open to everybody that would have liked to check it. It was, I think, a very beautiful initiative to share, actually, what they had. So in 2016, there were all these small initiatives all around the world by male artists, moving literally their own archives somewhere for a limited amount of time, but in fact, making it public. These things inspire, these initiatives inspire the concept of a temporary library, particularly for media art, which is something that came up for me after I've traveled quite a lot in the last 25 years. And one of the things I'm usually doing is to check with the library, institutional library of the institution I'm invited, what they have about especially new media art, which is usually quite disappointing. And it's not the fault of the librarians, but I mean, it's how it is. You can usually find, if you're lucky, some catalogs, but next to that you can find an AutoCAD manual, next to Lev Manovich, next to something quite unrelated, related to computers somehow, but it's not really organic and it's not really well curated all over the place. So for what I could find, that there is no, except maybe the ZKM hub, where there's no really big, well-organized library about new media art all over the place. So since especially new media art has been quite marginalized, like plenty of other small and not very commercial art movements by the contemporary artwork, I thought about an initiative that at least could have given justice to the history of it. So the concept of a temporary library, I will explain more thoroughly in a bit. It's about creating this resource. So the first one that I did was in 2017 for the Transmediale Festival in Berlin. Each temporary library I co-curate with somebody else. I don't want to do it alone. In 2017, I did it with Annette Gilbert, who is a scholar of artist publishing in Berlin. And the scope of all of it was to collect, make a small collection of books, not only published by the festival, but related to the festival history. So all about all the small offsprings that the festival generated over the years. In that year, Transmediale was celebrating 30 years of activities. So what we did was that we asked publishers, people, small institutions, to donate one copy of the selected books. Which were the selected books? Me and Annette curated a list. We literally asked for donations for 200 books. Quite surprisingly, since it was the first time, we got 170 of them. The next step was to exhibit them, as you've seen, making them public during the festival. We got some shelves, actually, where they were very well designed, and people were just free to browse them. There were also tables I will show you in a bit. But the idea was to create this resource, which is free during the festival. But then, after the festival, the aim is to create a stable and public resource. And once this stable and public resource is created, the special collection should be available to be borrowed by other events. I'm going to show you how. So this was the scenario, again, for me, quite surprisingly popular. There, people had tables and chairs, especially students after a while came and started to take pictures, like scanning pages. They were interested to ask where they could find the books. Actually, the answer was that when we do temporary libraries, we usually do a kind of punkish leaflet with all the books unlisted, including also the donors, so that people know where to find them if they want to retrieve them from somewhere else. This small library at the end was donated to the Universität der Künste in Berlin after a very brief dialogue. That's why I say it created a stable resource for them, for free. They were so enthusiastic that they made even a small exhibition about it, and it's creating a special collection. What's the last step of each of them? Is that the institutional library should accept that if another event in the future would ask for this special collection, let's say there's an event in Munich which is asking for the collection, they don't have to compellingly ship it, but they have to at least start a dialogue and see if it can be done or not. In Germany, it didn't happen yet. I did a few other ones. Let me just briefly mention them. Same year, during ICEA, the Temporary Library of Latin American New Media Art, co-curated with Andrés Burbaro. Same year, the Temporary Library was busy year. Temporary Library of Portuguese New Media Art during the conference ExcoX in 2017, co-curated with Luisa Ribas and Miguel Carvalhais. 1 year later, Temporary Library of Norwegian Media Art during the Metamorph Biennial, co-curated with Zanet Serpigna and Stahl Stensely. And this is the first time that the Temporary Library proved its own concept. In 2019, the Bienal de Arte Contemporânea de Maia in Portugal asked the library, Maia is up in the north, not very far from Porto, asked for the library, Portuguese library, the Temporary Library of Portuguese New Media Art, which was in Lisbon. And with a car, the library was brought to Maia, stayed in a container for 2 months, and then brought back to Lisbon. So it proved to be a temporary library, stable resource, but able to move somehow. The same happened for the Norwegian one during the FINE event same year. And here, I mean, I'm not controlling the libraries once they are donated, of course. But here, Zane made a second call to submit possible books. And when the library traveled back from Oslo to Trondheim, there were 40 new titles that were added. So this is also another interesting process. The last 2 ones are the Temporary Library for Creating Commons during the event Creating Commons in Berlin, co-curated with Cornelia Sol, Frank Stadler, and Shusha Niederberger. And the last one is the Temporary Library of Danish Media Art, 2022, co-created with Morten Sondgaard, who is over here, and Mons Jakobsen. Okay. I think about it as a collective experience, enabling and activating social processes beyond the logistic, which I think is still quite interesting. Because if you think about that for a moment, from literally nothing, so from the generosity of the people involved, we create a stable resource that is public, and it can also move. So it's a collective experience, and it's enabling social processes. There is I found out somehow that people is willing to donate them also because there's a mutual acknowledgement among the donors. They somehow feel compelled to be part of the process. And there's a collective sharing and discovering in a dialogue because it's public during the event. So those who are going and use it start, more often than not, they start a conversation among them, which is what should also happen in libraries, beyond the rules. And these library experiments are meant also to evolve collectively over time, like in the case of the Trondheim one. They shouldn't be stuck, but they are meant also to thrive, if possible, and if the conditions allow it. And of course, this is what I called non-accidental archiving compared to the magazine one. Okay, last project. It will take a little bit as well, which is called distributed archives. And this is also part of the practice with the magazine. So let's just have a very classic definition of what a library is, but I think it's quite useful from David Lanks, who is a historian and librarian himself. I mean, it sounds kind of trivial, but I think it's important to remark that the mission of librarians is to improve society through facilitating knowledge creation in their communities. So it's not only about providing materials, it's not only a service, I would say a consuming service of knowledge, which still would be very, very good somehow. But the aim is to facilitate the knowledge creation in their communities. So it's going beyond that. And to go instead, to consider a way more radical approach, I would like to evoke Aaron Swartz from his Guerrilla Open Access Manifesto, when he said we need to take information wherever it is stored, make our copies, and share them with the world. And you probably know about the tragic trajectory of Aaron Swartz, but I think this is one of the most meaningful quotes that he had in this manifesto. And beyond the process, it's again the focus on the sharing, which is also beyond, behind every possible library. So the reasoning about the distributed archive or distributed libraries came from the Neural Archive. You can imagine that in 30 years we have accumulated a lot of publications. Artist catalogs, books, theoretical books, publications of all sorts, artist books, artist magazines, zines. From the 95%, they were donated to us by people by artists. There are some artists here donated, and people in this room who donated their publication to the Neural Archive. Possibly to be reviewed in the magazine, but not all the time, even just for them to give us something that we would have kept and stored and possibly spread the word about. So in 2012, more than 12 years ago, I started to think, okay, but this collection is quite remarkable. I haven't seen anywhere, as I mentioned. I can't make a public library in Bari, southeast of Italy, where Neural is based, because, I mean, bureaucratically it would be just a mess. Nobody can guarantee that it will last more than 1 year. And I want something that would last much longer than that. So what can I do? What can we do as a whole magazine redaction, people working on it about that? How can we reciprocate the generosity that has been given to us? And the idea also was inspired by Marcel Mars, theorist and hacker from Zagreb, who made this quote. He is really working this called the shadow libraries scene. If you're familiar with them, he's one of the most active person there. And once he said, he's making this great collection of digital books and sharing them. When he said, when everyone is a librarian, libraries everywhere, he was referring to the fact that if you start to collect digital files with some meaning behind them, possibly PDFs of books, and you share them, actually you are a librarian. And everybody can do that. And a collective of people start to do that, then the library is everywhere. And which was striking me, together with the concept of becoming custodians. Because collecting should also be very connected to take responsibility, which is what inherently we did with the magazine. We were committed to keep what was donated to us. So, again, back to the Neural Archive, what to do. I started to think that it was already enough to make public what we had. Because making it public would have meant that we were publicly taking responsibility of it and sharing what we had. So, and very important, we're not alone. Actually, the history of new media art, most of it, is in small institutions like Neural, who had their own archive, their own small library. But all these knowledge capital collections are kind of buried in their own places. And I started to think, okay, how it is for other kind of art movements, like mail art, is exactly the same. If you think about punk, most of the archives are in small institutions, are in journalists, personal houses. Experimental theater could be the same. And these small archives and libraries are scattered. So they are distributed. They're not centralized in big libraries. So I started to think, okay, this is a whole galaxy of small institutions or personal libraries or private collections. They are just not indexed, not present in any form other than their physical one. So what to do was to publishing and interconnecting the catalogs. That's already a lot, I think. So to manifesting their presence and the content. And that's exactly what it did. Vertical searching, take a note about that. I'll come back to that at the end. Why to publish the catalogs? Because again, there will be a mutual recognition of the respective collections, but also a shared responsibility. Which means that if at some point we at Neural, we stop the activities and I want to go to India and meditate for the rest of my life and get rid of everything else, then somebody else in the network could take over the whole thing. It won't be wasted. And this is the definition of distributed archives. So what we did was to commission an actually free software-based database online. It's as simple as that. It's just a catalog. We commission also the graphic interface. The code, all the code is free on GitHub. And so far, we have included records, which are only descriptive records. I will show one in a minute, of a bit less than 2,000 publications out of the probably 6,000 or 7,000 that we host. This is a classic record. The book has a special, this book, Art plus Telecommunication for us, has a special history, but I will share it maybe later if you want. There is only bibliographical data, the scan of the cover, and the content index. Technically, content index is violation of copyright. We really don't care because it's where essential information is, the authors, the titles, keywords, because the whole, this whole database is of course searchable. So that's why we include it, really not caring about that. There are no PDFs. There are no PDFs for a specific reason. One is that we are publishers ourselves with Neural, so we know the economy of it. Unless the publisher or the institution would say, yes, you can include them, we don't include them. They are meant to be polycentric systems. I'm a big fan of this definition because there is no single center. It's like a network. There are more centers. It's a polycentric. Each node of different distributed libraries is as important as the others, so polycentric. And finally, this is just this year, after 12 years, the final proof and realization of the distributed library in reality. So I had a residency for 1 year at V2 in Rotterdam, and possibly the most important outcome that we came up with is the prototype now completely working on both sides, where you can search the V2 archive websites and posts and the Neural archives and posts together. I think you're almost all familiar with V2. V2 is a historical, probably one of the most historical institutions running from the end of 70s about new media art. We have kind of similar online presence, thousands and thousands of pages plus collections. We teamed up with a skilled and sympathetic programmer in order to make it. So now if you go to the V2 website, you can make the advanced search, and if you search for things, you end up also having the results from the Neuro one. And clicking on them, you end up in the respective websites. And it's the same on the Neuro website as well. We really hope it's the first two of more. There is already interest by a few more of them. And if you allow me, this is very important, and it's the vertical search engine I was mentioning before, which was all a core idea. Why that? Because this is a specialized knowledge, is shared among the different institutions, and also, let me also say, it cuts out all the commercial platforms. Basically, we don't need anymore to go through Google or whoever else for these specific purposes. But we create the technical infrastructure to share similar archives and so the same kind of knowledge among the different actors, but respectively of all of them. Because again, there's no centralized venue, but it's a polycentric, and you end up in each of them when you find something interesting. Let me end with this, well, it's kind of self-quote, which is kind of shameful, but I come up with this other final concept, which is the shamans of knowledge. So the librarian and custodian would then be elevated to shamans of knowledge. This is what I deeply think we should actually do. Knowing their collections in such a way that they can guide others to discover new connections and create new social and cultural relationships, which is just a kind of small update to the very classic librarian role that I was mentioning before. Okay, that was it. Thank you very much.